They told me I was too old for sparks, too set in my ways to stumble into something new. But hell, they didn't live in my skin. I'm Denise, 48, Atlanta born and bred, divorced for going on 5 years, and let me tell you, love had left me with bills, empty walls, and a heart that only stirred when my coffee was hot and my music loud enough to drown out the silence. I'm tired of starting over, tired of men who talk too much or too little, and tired of wondering if I missed my chance. My apartment is quiet like a church after the sermon, and I like it that way. My plants get watered on time. My fridge is stocked. My life is predictable, safe. But late at night, when the city hums outside my window and the AC clicks in rhythm with my heartbeat, I feel it, the ache of not being seen, not touched, not laughed with, not heard in the ways that matter. My skin remembers what I try to bury beneath layers of routines and books stacked like walls around my heart. And sometimes I lie awake staring at the ceiling thinking, when did I stop being the woman who wanted? Not just attention. No, I'm talking about being felt fully, like someone actually knew the bones of me, the edges and scars and all. I sip my coffee slowly, letting the steam curl around my face. The aroma hits me like memory. I tell myself I'm content. That's what grown women do. They adjust, they survive, they find comfort in control. But inside, something restless stirs, something that whispers, don't close the door yet. And that whisper, well, it's about to become louder than the hum of my life. Bills don't wait for feelings. Rent, utilities, insurance, they don't care if my heart's healed or broken. So I did what any grown woman does. I cleaned up the spare room and slapped a for rent ad online. No frills, no poetry, just facts. 1 bedroom, quiet street, good lighting. I told myself it was practical, nothing more. I wasn't looking for company. I wasn't looking for romance. Hell, I wasn't even looking for conversation. I was looking for someone to help pay the bills so I could keep my plants alive and my fridge full. Cleaning that room felt like moving through memory, paint peeling at the corners, the faint smell of old perfume lingering in the carpet, the tiny crack in the window frame I'd ignored for years. I scrubbed, dusted, rearranged, fluffed pillows, and set out a clean set of sheets. I even placed a small succulent on the dresser, a quiet nod to civility, a promise that this space wasn't just a box to sleep in. The mirror reflected my face back at me. Tired eyes, a jawline that had seen more arguments than kisses, hair pulled back into a messy bun. I wasn't expecting him or anyone to notice the small grace in the way I lived my life. I made my decision like I make most decisions these days, practical, unemotional, calculated. But even as I adjusted the throw blanket, I caught a flicker of anticipation in myself, a heartbeat I tried to ignore. It's just a room, I muttered, nothing more. And yet I couldn't shake the feeling that the quiet walls of my home were about to be stirred, that maybe, just maybe, someone would walk through that door and change the rhythm I'd built so carefully. The knock came just after 10, a soft rhythm that made my chest skip. I wasn't expecting anyone until later in the afternoon, but there it was, 3 short taps, polite, deliberate. I wiped my hands on the towel and walked to the door, already whispering questions I didn't want to answer. When I opened it, there he was, Malik, 27, tall enough to make me tilt my head slightly, with locks that fell over his forehead like he hadn't bothered taming them, and eyes that held a kind of light I hadn't seen in years. Calm, observant eyes that somehow made you feel like he could see you without needing words. A duffel slung over one shoulder, sneakers dusty from the sidewalk, and a small, tentative smile that hinted he was both nervous and sure of himself. "Hi, Miss Denise," he said, and my chest skipped again at the polite cadence, the soft tone. "I'm Malik. I'm here about the room." I stepped aside, gesturing him in, but my hands trembled a little just then. He moved with ease, polite, aware of every corner, every line of furniture, not loud, not chaotic, just present in a way that made the space feel warmer, like a window had been cracked open and sunlight was sneaking in. I showed him the kitchen, the guest bathroom, the little shelf I'd arranged with books I never touched, the desk by the window. He didn't say much, just nodded, smiled, occasionally asking if he could help. I declined, insisting he settle in, but even as he carried his bag to the room, I felt it, an unfamiliar flutter. My quiet house, my careful routines, they were about to change, and somehow I knew I wouldn't be ready for it. Days passed and our rhythms began to intertwine without either of us noticing at first. Malik was quiet but present, like a soft hum in the background of my carefully controlled life. I'd catch him lingering in the kitchen, leaning against the counter while scrolling through his phone, and my chest would tighten for reasons I refused to name. He had this way of saying Miss Denise when he needed my attention, and it felt different from any man I'd ever known, respectful, deliberate, almost reverent. I laughed at the way he pronounced my name sometimes, like he was savoring it. And oh Lord, the way he laughed, it wasn't loud or brash, it was soft, easy, the kind of laugh that made you want to lean closer just to see the way it lit up his face. I caught myself lingering near the kitchen more than necessary just to hear it. One evening, the house smelled like the last bit of rain and warm jasmine tea he'd brewed without asking. I was perched on the couch, book in hand, pretending to read, but my eyes kept finding him as he moved around the living room, adjusting photos on the wall, humming quietly. There was something about the way he occupied the space, without demanding it, that pressed against my heart in a way I couldn't explain. And then it happened, subtle but undeniable. I noticed the brush of his hand when he handed me a cup of tea, the way his gaze lingered on mine for just a fraction longer than necessary, not lustful, curious, attentive. And I realized with a jolt that the quiet house, my quiet life, it was no longer enough. Something inside me had started to stir, a dangerous, tender pull that whispered, I might not be as untouchable as I thought. I woke to the hum of the refrigerator, the kind of quiet that makes you aware of every creak, every whisper of the house. Glancing at the clock, it was past 1 a.m. Sleep had fled, replaced by a restless sort of curiosity that I hadn't felt in years. The kitchen light was soft, casting long shadows over the counters, and there he was, Malik, standing by the stove, gently stirring a pot of water. The aroma of mint tea curled through the air, and I froze, caught between wanting to retreat and wanting to linger. You up? He asked, voice low and careful, like he knew the fragility of the moment. I nodded, barely. He didn't insist, didn't judge. He just handed me a steaming mug, and our fingers brushed, accidental but electric. I took a sip, the warmth spreading through me, loosening the tension I'd carried for decades. We didn't speak for a while, just sat across from each other, the silence heavy with meaning. Then he began talking. Stories from his photography projects, the city streets he'd wandered, the people he'd noticed. His words pulled me in, painting scenes I almost forgotten I could feel. I laughed, too loud, too unguarded, and felt the pull of something dangerous, something I hadn't expected at my age. I caught myself leaning slightly closer, noticing the way the lamplight caught his hair, how his eyes crinkled when he smiled. the rhythm of his voice settling into the spaces of my quiet life. By the time the teacups were empty and the clock hinted at morning, the house had shifted without a sound. It wasn't just warmth anymore. It was possibility. And for the first time in years, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I'd forgotten how to let someone in. Malik came into the kitchen one evening, camera slung over his shoulder, looking like he carried the whole world in his hands. "Miss Denise," he said, that gentle, careful tone again, "I've got a project for class. I need to capture life, real life. You okay with me taking a few shots?" I laughed, surprised at the words. "You serious? Me? I'm too old for that kind of thing." My voice carried a mixture of humor and hesitation, but even as I said it, my heart thumped a little faster than it had in months. "Nah," he said, leaning against the counter, eyes steady and soft. "You're not too old. You're timeless, and I think there's a story there, one worth catching." I paused, studying him. Malik had a way of speaking that made me feel seen, not in that flashy, superficial way, but deep down where I'd shoved so much of myself behind routine and walls. And damn it, his words cut straight through me. So I agreed, half laughing, half curious. I found myself adjusting my hair, smoothing my robe, feeling the self-conscious tug of being observed. But then he raised his camera and the magic happened. He didn't rush. He didn't demand. He'd simply clicked, and each snap of the shutter seemed to pull a little life back into me I didn't realize I'd lost. I looked at the images later that night. Soft light spilling over my shoulders, the quiet lines of my face catching the warmth of home. I saw me, alive, whole and human again. And for the first time in a long while, I felt something dangerous and thrilling stir. A whisper that maybe I wasn't done with love, connection, or feeling seen after all. I sat in front of my laptop that night, Malik's photos open on the screen, and I couldn't breathe right. My hands shook as I scrolled, each image a mirror I hadn't dared to look into for years. That soft gray light spilling over my shoulders, the way my hair felt like it belonged somewhere beautiful. It wasn't just a photo, it was proof that I still mattered, that I could still matter. Tears pricked my eyes, uninvited but welcome. I hadn't seen myself like this in ages. Not really. The world had gotten so loud, so judgmental. Divorce, aging, loneliness. I had convinced myself I was just surviving, going through the motions. But these photos, Malik had stripped all that away. He'd captured a version of me I thought was gone forever. Alive, soft, whole, beautiful. And the dangerous thing, I didn't want it gone. I wanted to feel it longer. I wanted him to see it, and maybe, just maybe, I wanted him to feel it too. I caught myself thinking about the way he'd framed me, the way he'd whispered about light and shadow as if my presence mattered more than the picture itself. My stomach flooded at the memory of him adjusting the lens, leaning closer than necessary, careful, respectful, aware. I shook my head and laughed quietly, bitter and soft. "Girl, what you doing?" I whispered to the empty room. But my body remembered, my heart remembered, and even my pride, well, it started to crumble a little bit. Malik didn't just take photos. He reminded me what it felt like to be seen, really seen. And in that dangerous, delicious awareness, I realized something I hadn't admitted out loud just yet. I was ready to feel again. It was late afternoon, and sunlight spilled through the blinds like gold dust over the hardwood floor. I was reorganizing my living room shelves, humming a tune I hadn't remembered I knew, when Malik appeared behind me. I didn't hear him come in, didn't sense the quiet rhythm of his steps until he was already there. Need a hand? He asked softly, not with command, not with expectation, just a gentle offer. I waved him off, insisting I was fine, but he didn't leave. He knelt beside me, shoulder brushing mine, and my skin sparked where we touched. It was brief, subtle, a hand grazing my wrist as he guided me to fit a stubborn shelf bracket, but my body remembered things I had pushed deep inside, the warmth of a touch that didn't ask for permission but demanded attention. My heart thudded hard. I thought it might echo through the entire room. I dared to glance at him, trying to mask the heat rising in my chest. Malik's eyes, calm and steady, didn't flinch. They held me, really held me in that weightless, unspoken way. There was something about the way he existed in that small space beside me, that quiet focus that made the air itself feel charged. I wanted to reach for him. I wanted to pull away. I wanted to laugh and cry all at once. And then, as quickly as it started, it ended. He leaned back slightly, giving me space, his presence still lingering like a fragrance. I caught my reflection in the polished floor and nearly didn't recognize myself, the woman who could feel so much with a single fleeting touch. I whispered into the quiet room, almost to myself, "Damn, what is happening to me?" And I knew, just knew, that nothing about my life would ever feel the same after this. I pulled back hard. The next morning, I made breakfast in silence, moving quickly so Malik wouldn't linger too long, so I wouldn't have to look at him. His presence had been easy, warm, tempting, but too close, too dangerous. I told myself I wasn't about to be that woman again, the one who let someone in, who let herself feel too much, too fast, too foolish. Every time our hands brushed, every time he laughed in that soft, knowing way, I felt it, the pull that made my chest tight and my knees weak. And I hated it. Hated how alive it made me feel. Hated how much I wanted it. Hated that a man 12 years younger could do this to me, could make me remember a version of myself I thought I buried under divorce papers, mortgage bills, and long nights on my porch. So I ran. I kept my distance, stayed busy, avoided the kitchen when he was there, even stayed out late at my favorite cafe pretending to write, pretending my laptop and papers were enough to fill the space he had carved in my heart. But the house betrayed me. Every corner, every shadow, every little sound, the creak of the floorboards, the soft hum of his music from the guest room, the faint trace of his cologne haunted me. I couldn't escape it. And yet, when he smiled at me later that evening, like nothing had shifted, my defenses cracked just a little. I clenched my teeth, turned away, telling myself I was strong, that I was done letting a boy, no, a man, change the rhythm of my life. But deep down, I already knew the truth. I wasn't done. I couldn't be, because Malik had already found the part of me that had been sleeping, and it wasn't going back to sleep, not ever. Even when silence returned, the house didn't feel the same. I moved through rooms as if someone else had rearranged the furniture while I slept. The hallway, the living room, even the kitchen. I'd been here alone for years, but now every step felt like walking through someone else's thoughts. I caught myself lingering at the counter, just imagining him making tea, imagining his fingers brushing mine when we both reached for the kettle. The scent of mint tea that once smelled ordinary now felt like a signal, a whisper, a promise. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination, just the ghosts of my own loneliness playing tricks. But the truth? The truth was that the house had a rhythm now, a heartbeat that matched his presence even when he wasn't in the room. I started noticing things I hadn't before. How he left small gestures behind, cups lined up neatly, the faint click of his camera bag being set down, the way the curtains shifted when he passed by the window, little breadcrumbs of him everywhere. And every time I saw one, my chest constricted, my mind whispered, "He's here. He's still here." It was maddening and terrifying. I wanted to push it all away, to pretend the house was just walls and floors and nothing more. But every time I passed the guest room, I felt the pull. That space wasn't just a room anymore. It was a signal, a waiting place, a reminder that what had begun quietly, in touches and glances, had settled somewhere deep inside me. And I realized, with a shiver I didn't want to name, that I was no longer guarding the house. I was guarding my heart. And that, I knew, was the hardest part. I woke to the faint hum of morning light spilling through the blinds, painting the room in soft gold. My sheets smelled like last night's lavender laundry, and for a moment, I thought I was alone. But then I felt it, a weight, subtle but undeniable, a presence beside me that hadn't been there before. Malik. He was there, lying quietly, not touching me, not pressing, just there. The rhythm of his breathing was steady, calming like the tide brushing gently against the shore. My heart stuttered, unsure if it had permission to race. I wanted to reach over to feel the warmth of his skin, but my hand froze midair. I didn't mean for it to come to this. Not this fast, not this intimate. And yet here we were, teetering on a line I thought I'd erased years ago. His eyes opened slowly, meeting mine with a tenderness that stole my breath. "You awake?" His voice was low, careful, carrying no shame, no pressure, just curiosity, patience, and something I hadn't felt in a long time. Acceptance. I whispered back, barely audible, "Yes." And the world contracted, leaving only us in that small, quiet space between night and day. Slowly, deliberately, he shifted closer, careful not to invade, careful not to scare, careful enough to make me realize that I could let him in without losing myself. I moved over, the smallest shift, and he followed. We lay there in silence, breaths sinking like an unspoken language. His hand eventually found my waist, light, almost reverent. I felt a warmth I hadn't known I'd missed, a tether to something I'd stopped believing existed. Not lust, not recklessness, just presence. And in that simple, quiet morning, I understood. Some things don't have to shout to matter. The sun climbed higher, painting our shadows across the bed, and I let myself stay there, letting the weight of being seen and safe sink in. I woke to the smell of coffee and the faint hum of the city waking up outside my window. My body still carried the warmth of Malik's presence, the memory of our quiet morning pressing against my skin. My heart was loud, and my mind raced with questions I didn't want answers to. Was this real? Was it wrong? Did I just cross a line I'd sworn never to approach again? I slipped out of bed carefully, tracing the contours of my own comfort zone, feeling the subtle ache in places I hadn't remembered existed. And then I saw him, Malik, standing by the kitchen counter, shirt casually rumpled, hands busy pouring coffee, like this was just any morning. His eyes flicked up, catching mine, soft but steady. No guilt, no awkwardness, just him. And that's when it hit me. Guilt, like a heavy weight pressing down, whispering all the things society tells you about a woman my age and a man his. Too young, too bold, too reckless. My own voice chimed in, reminding me of the years of independence I'd fought for, the walls I'd built, the promises I'd made myself. And yet, here I was, trembling in the kitchen, wanting nothing more than to reach for him, to let him fold me into the warmth I hadn't realized I'd been craving.
He didn't flinch, didn't ask for forgiveness, didn't make me explain. He just smiled, a small, knowing, gentle smile, and slid a cup of coffee toward me. "Here," he said, "for you." And suddenly, the kitchen didn't feel like a battleground of shame. It felt like home. I sat there, heart pounding, sipping the bitter warmth, trying to reconcile the fire in my chest with the voice in my head. And I realized something terrifying and wonderful. I wanted this. Even if the world said I shouldn't, even if I couldn't name it yet, I wanted him. And that realization, as exhilarating as it was, scared the hell out of me. The kitchen smelled like toasted bread and roasted coffee beans, but my senses barely registered it. All I could focus on was Malik moving around like this was just another morning, like the world hadn't shifted beneath my feet overnight. My chest tightened, and I wanted to say something, apologize, explain, confess, but my words got caught somewhere between fear and desire. He didn't look at me like I'd done something wrong. He didn't act embarrassed or hesitant or awkward. Malik simply went about making breakfast as if nothing had happened. Eggs sizzled in the pan. The smell of butter melting into the skillet was almost enough to distract me, but not quite. I stayed at the counter, watching him, feeling my pulse accelerate in ways I hadn't felt in years. When he turned to slide a plate toward me, our eyes met. That steady, unflinching gaze, so calm, so sure, so unapologetically him, hit me harder than any touch could. He didn't shame me for what happened, didn't skirt the topic, didn't demand a reason or an explanation. He just existed, fully present. And in that moment, it wasn't about age or societal rules or logic. It was about him seeing me, really seeing me, without judgment. I hesitated, then reached for the plate. My fingers brushed his, a fleeting contact that made my stomach twist in a delicious, nerve-wracking way. He didn't flinch. He didn't retreat. He just smiled softly, and it was like he was telling me, wordlessly, that what happened between us didn't have to carry shame, that it could be something quiet, sacred, and real. For the first time since he'd walked into my life, I felt the weight on my chest ease. It didn't vanish, no, the guilt lingered, but it mingled with something else now, possibility, warmth, and the terrifying thrill of letting someone in when you weren't supposed to. We didn't need to name it. Love, lust, infatuation. Those words felt too loud, too public for what we were building in the corners of my home. It was quiet, intimate, and dangerous in the way that made my heart pound and my mind spin. Every glance, every brush of his hand against mine felt like we were breaking some invisible rule, and I couldn't help but crave it. Late nights became our secret. The hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the floorboards, the soft rustle of sheets, these sounds marked the moments we shared when the world wasn't watching. Malik would lean against the doorway, camera forgotten, and just talk to me while I stirred tea. I found myself laughing, leaning closer, letting my defenses drop just enough for him to see me, the real me, messy hair, soft edges, and all. Sometimes he'd touch my shoulder, just a feather-light contact, and I'd shiver as if the air itself had turned electric. Other times, he'd brush past me in the hallway, our hips grazing accidentally, or maybe not so accidentally, and the world outside my walls faded to gray. I felt alive in ways I hadn't in years, and it scared me. One rainy evening, he showed up at my kitchen door with a quiet smile and a soaked duffel bag. I wanted to scold him, tell him he didn't need to come over, but my chest betrayed me. I let him in. We moved around each other in the small space like dancers who rehearsed every step. The steam from the kettle curled between us, the scent of rain clinging to his skin. In those shadows, I saw him fully, and he saw me. No judgment, no fear, just us, existing in this delicate, intoxicating pause between what is and what could be. And in that silence, I realized we were building something neither of us had names for, but I knew one thing for sure: we were both addicted to it. I never thought it would happen so fast. One morning, the mail lady, Miss Haiti, sweet but always nosy, caught sight of Malik leaving my room. I froze, teacup in hand, like my body had turned to stone. She blinked at us, and that one glance was louder than any words. I could feel the neighborhood gossip brewing already, thick and heavy in the air like humidity before a storm. My chest tightened, and for the first time in weeks, the house felt smaller, claustrophobic even. Every creak of the floorboards, every hum of the fridge suddenly sounded like it was announcing our secret. Malik didn't flinch, not a hint of shame. He just gave me that calm, steady smile that it made me melt the first day he walked through my door. But inside, I was screaming, because now the quiet rhythm we'd built was exposed, vulnerable to the world. I wanted to retreat, to erase myself from the hallway, from the kitchen, from him, but I couldn't. He reached out, brushing a damp strand of hair from my face, and that touch anchored me. He spoke softly, just a bit to the dejection, but I heard every word. "It's just curiosity. I know what it looks like. It's so fragrant." I nodded, but my mind raced. Curiosity today, judgment tomorrow, whispers the next. All the same, I couldn't stop thinking about how alive I felt in his presence, even with the risk. My walls, carefully built over decades of heartbreak, were crumbling, and part of me was terrified. But another part was craving that collapse, the raw, unfiltered connection that no one else had ever stirred in me. By that evening, Malik and I were in the kitchen stirring tea like nothing had happened, but the electricity lingered, unspoken yet undeniable. We were no longer just tenant and landlord. We were something else, something dangerous, intoxicating, and impossible to ignore. I used to think love came loud, flashy, dramatic, like something from the movies, full of declarations and grand gestures. But standing there in Malik's arms, soaked in the quiet aftermath of our storm, I realized how wrong I'd been. Love wasn't about age or shame or the whispers of the world. It was in the soft press of his hand against mine, the way his eyes caught the smallest tremor of my smile, the way he simply was with me, without demand, without expectation. Every hesitation I'd carried, every fear of being too old or too tired, melted away in the warmth of his presence. I saw myself reflected in him, not the me I thought the world saw, hardened and weathered, but the me I'd buried, vibrant, alive, worthy. He didn't need me to be anything other than myself, and that realization hit harder than any declaration ever could.
We sat together that evening on the porch, tea in hand, watching the Atlanta skyline blur into twilight. The city buzzed, oblivious to the small miracle taking place in my backyard. "You know," he said softly, leaning into my side, "I never cared about age. I care about you, the real you, and I want to be here for all of it." I laughed, shaky and breathless, because it was too much, and yet it was perfect. I leaned against him, letting the tension in my chest release into the night air. Every scar, every line, every quiet moment of loneliness had led me here. To this, where love wasn't about saving or fixing, but about seeing and being seen. And in that moment, I understood that the truth of love isn't in the story you tell the world. It's in the small, steadfast moments where someone chooses you anyway. Morning sunlight spilled across the kitchen counter, golden and gentle, and for a moment, the world felt suspended. I shuffled out of the bedroom, still wrapped in the softness of my robe, hair half-tied, feet bare on the cool hardwood. And there it was, a single cup of tea, steam curling up like it had a life of its own, sitting just where I liked it. Sweet, not too hot, the way Malik always remembered. I paused, hand hovering above the handle, heart caught in that familiar thrum that had been threading through my chest for weeks. It was simple, ordinary even, but it carried the weight of all the quiet mornings, all the tender gestures, all the times he'd shown up in ways that had nothing to do with lust or need and everything to do with presence. He hadn't left a note, he hadn't made a scene, he just had remembered me. I lifted the cup, inhaling the warmth, the scent, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel too old, too tired, or too quiet. I felt seen, alive. And even though the world outside could still be loud, judgmental, messy, inside that kitchen, in that house, I knew something unshakable had taken root. Love had found a way, not loud, not dramatic, just true. I set the cup down gently, the liquid rippling, and smiled. Malik wasn't perfect. Life wasn't perfect. But this quiet, steady care, this gentle insistence that I was worth every second, it was enough. More than enough. I poured myself a second cup, and as I leaned against the counter, sipping slowly, I whispered to myself, "No, I am not too old for love. Not ever." Outside, Atlanta thrummed, but inside, in the warmth of that kitchen, I finally understood. Love doesn't follow rules. It doesn't ask permission. It shows up quietly and changes everything. I want to hear about a moment when someone saw you in a way that made you feel alive again. Share in the comments. Do you think she'll let him stay or push him away? Comment stay or run. Your choice might appear in the next video. Hit the like button if you've ever been caught between fear and desire. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Don't miss what happens next.